Hi, my name is Shivangi Gupta, and this video for Teen Teach is going to be about Japan and how they created these balloon bombs during World War II that they actually unleashed on the US that was hidden by the US government. And this isn't a conspiracy theory, this is an actual thing that happened. Okay, let's get started. So, when you go to the very beginning of this story, Japanese scientists made these big balloons that had bombs attached to them. And they ended up researching air currents to figure out how, from Japan, they could release these balloons and have them float on global air currents across the world to the United States, where they would just be floating over the US. And this is a real thing. This is a real thing. And the way that they would drop the bombs is that the balloon would be released and it would float up, say, to this height, and say this is the US. Slowly, as it would be floating across the world, it would get a bit lower and it would get a bit lower. And at a certain altitude, when the balloon reached a certain altitude, which was calculated to be when the balloon would be above the United States, it would drop these bombs. Bagheera, stop. Sorry, one sec. Sorry, just my dog. So what ended up happening is that then they would drop these bombs. Now, you may be wondering, why have we not really heard about this? This is for a few reasons. Number one, just the way that the United States is geographically, we have a lot of space, but not that many people. We have a lot of farmland and just stretched out places. If you really think of the middle of the United States, the north, all that good stuff. There are many spots in the US where there simply aren't that many people. So even though they released tens of thousands of these balloon bombs, many of them just ended up kind of exploding in farmland where no one really knew of their existence. There were a few which of course didn't successfully make it, and so it ended up being that there were only a few that actually had an impact and interacted with US citizens. Now, there was one example of this where one did fall and it did actually explode, and many people kind of gathered around. And interestingly enough, what ended up happening is the United States government came to the site of this bomb and they swore all of the people involved who saw this bomb explode from the balloon to secrecy. And this was only released many, many years later. This entire thing was only released about in the 80s. Yeah, in the 80s. Now, the reason why the United States government decided to do this is because the Japanese government's intention with creating these balloon bombs was to wreak fear into society. Because, if you think about it, the Japanese government already had all these planes, they had ships to attack the coasts, they had just all these other very effective ways of deploying bombs and bombing the US. However, there's one key thing about planes, their primary mode of dropping bombs. They have engines that make noise. Now, because of that, we would already have a warning and know if there was ever a plane that would be flying over the US or anything like that. However, a balloon floating from Japan would be completely silent. Now, what the Japanese government was hoping to do during World War during World War II, is they were hoping that this idea of the possibility of being bombed without even having that audio warning of bombs dropping of the engine of a plane, just these silent balloons which could just bomb the US and its citizens at any time, they were hoping that this would create fear in the US citizens. However, the US successfully covered up any of the few times when these did successfully land in the US, and so the Japanese government, even though their entire plan was successful, they ended up not succeeding in their end goal. So that's just a really interesting history story. I had no idea about it. These bomb balloons that the Japanese government had, dropped during World War II, which the US government then covered up, and we're really lucky that they ended up declassifying those documents so that we could learn about it. Thanks for listening.